Okay, well, it's time to begin our study this morning on the book of Revelation. If you would, open up your Bibles to Revelation chapter 1. That's Revelation chapter 1. Should have it up on the board. There it is. And we left off last week with verse number 13, if memory serves me correctly. In the midst of the seven candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. We left off last week explaining the candlesticks. What are the candlesticks? Seven churches. Very good. Seven churches of Asia. Very good. What do we call? What do I got this from Art Ogden. What do you think a good thing to think of when you drop down? Look at verse number 20. The mystery of the seven stars which thou sawest in my right hand, and the seven golden candlesticks. The seven stars are the angels of the seven churches, and the seven candlesticks which thou sawest are the seven churches. What do we call this? Art Ogden coined the phrase hitching post. This is a hitching post. Since the book of Revelation is a book of symbols and signs, and candlesticks mean something, and the stars mean something, and this means something, when it gives us the definition and it says the candlesticks are this and the stars are this, you don't have to go looking for any other definition. We got it. We can hitch this definition to this, right to this post. It's a hitching post, right? I'm going to tie my horse right here. So I know whenever the book of Revelation talks about the candlesticks, from now on, it's talking about the church. One of those churches that's mentioned. The seven candlesticks are the seven churches, right? The candlestick, it's not like you picture, that you've seen in pictures. This is more like a lamp post in the original Greek. Candlestick implied, it means like a lamp stand. It would be a stand probably about 5 foot tall, would have a lamp on it with a flame burning with oil in the lamp. And this lamp stand contains and holds the light. That's what churches are to do. It holds the light of Christ. We don't hold another gospel. We don't hold another truth. We are to be the support beam, the support and the shining light for the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Amen. Turn to Luke chapter 8, or you can look at it on the board if you want. I'm going to go there here. Luke chapter 8, verse 16. Look what Jesus says about this in Luke 8. And drop down, let's look about verse number 15 and 16. Jesus said, Luke 8:16. No man, when he hath lighted a candle, covereth it with a vessel, or putteth it under the bed, but setteth it on a candlestick, or this lampstand, that they which enter in may see the light. So the church is supposed to put their light out there for the whole world to see. You don't have a light and then cover it up to conceal the light. The light shows forth everything, doesn't it? Yeah. You walk into a dark room, you flip the light on because you want to see, right? You're in darkness if you're in sin. You need the light to guide you out of that darkness into a bright place, into the light. Isn't that right? That's the idea. So, darkness is the idea of in sin, and then light is the idea of knowledge, understanding God's righteousness. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 4. Let's take a quick peek at this. I wasn't going to go here, but you know what? Let's do it. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 4. See if we can find this here. Down about around verse number 19. Jeremiah 4. Well, Look at verse 14, Jeremiah 4:14. O Jerusalem, wash thine heart from wickedness, that thou mayest be saved. How long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within thee? So the message is to Jerusalem. Jeremiah is a Jewish prophet to the Jews, and their headquarters was Jerusalem. You see that in verse 16. Let's drop down, look at beginning verse number 19. My bowels, I am pained at my very heart. My heart maketh a noise in me. I cannot hold my peace, because thou hast heard, O my soul, the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of the war. My bowels, I'm pained in my heart. There's a sound of a trumpet coming. There's an alarm of war. What's going on? Look at verse 20. Destruction upon destruction is cried, for the whole land is spoiled. Suddenly are my tents spoiled, and my curtains in a moment. How long shall I see the standard and hear the sound of the trumpet? This sounds a little bit like Revelation, anybody? The 7 trumpets and the destruction, and this is talking about the same thing, okay? We're going to get into all those things a little bit later in the book of Revelation. But look at verse 22. For my people is foolish. Who's the people? Israel, the Jews. My people is foolish. What's going to happen to them? The trumpet's going to sound. Destruction's going to come upon them, right? They're going to be taken away as God's people no longer. They're going to be destroyed. But anyways, he says, my people is foolish. They have not known me. They are sottish children. They have none understanding. They are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge. They do what? They're wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge. That explains Israel during Jesus' day. Jesus told them, I'm holding you responsible for all the righteous blood shed upon the earth. You've not been doing things right. You've been doing things totally wrong. You're not faithful, and I'm holding you responsible. Look at verse 23. I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form. Stop. What's he talking about here? What's he looking at? Ultimately.
The government, their country.
Israel. The Jews. I beheld the earth. This is the old earth, right? The old heaven and earth is what? Judaism, the old covenant, the Jews, Israel. I beheld the earth, and look at this. Lo, it was without form and void. And the heavens, and they had no light. Do you see that? Does this mean that the sun stopped shining in the nation of Israel? Does this mean they had no lampstands with lamps on it to burn light? Physically? This light is a metaphor. It's spiritual, isn't it?
Yes.
And by the way, if this sounds familiar, it should. This is Genesis 1, verses 1, 2, and 3. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was void and without form and in darkness. And here Jeremiah is saying, this is God's people he's talking about, not a physical planet. The people are without light. They have no understanding. So the Church of Christ, our primary job is to bring the light of God's truth into the world, and not only bring it, live it. If we don't live it, we can't preach it. One of the first things, Mario will remember this. Roosevelt will remember this. When we were holding services at the Muskegon Church of Christ, Hoger started having a little school. It didn't last long, but we were going to train young men to be preachers. And so Hoger is a professor from the Tennessee Bible College, an accredited college. He taught the book of Revelation there. He taught young men how to become preachers. And some of the fundamentals are so overlooked by people wanting to be preachers. One of the first things Hoger taught in that class is, if you want to be a preacher, you've got to be the example. If you're not willing to live the life, if you're not willing to be faithful, if you're not willing to set the mark this high, Don't think about being a preacher, because you'll bring people down wherever you're at. If you're not faithful in your attendance, you can't preach for other people to be faithful in their attendance. Right? If whatever it is you're doing, you tell a little white lie, if you're always depressed, if whatever it is in your life that's going on, you're impressing those people there to the degree that you're setting the mark at. Preachers have to be the pinnacle of a great example. If you're not willing to dedicate your life to that, preaching ain't for you. And I'll never forget that. Greg?
Preacher's got to have a gung-ho spirit in a way. Not a depressing, not a spirit as to where things don't really matter. Preacher's got to have that great go, and they got to continue that all the time with whoever.
Certainly. So if we don't exhibit this kind of light, then our light becomes dim. That's the idea, right? So not only do we preach the truth, we live the truth. If we don't live the truth, we're in trouble. And that's what happens with the 7 churches of Asia. They start getting in trouble because they stop. Some of them have some major issues, and they may be saying some things right, but they're living a life that says opposite of what they're actually preaching and teaching. And their lampstand, their candlestick, their congregation will be removed. No longer a part of the body of Christ. We're going to get into that more in chapter 2. So let's go back to Revelation 1 and back down to 13 here. Revelation 1:13. In the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about with the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow. And his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as of the sound of many waters. Wow! First of all, in verse 13, when it says, he's clothed with a garment down to the foot and girt about the paps with a golden girdle, if you were to reference that to Exodus 28 and Leviticus 8, these are garments which would be worn by the priest of God. So we know that this image here, this entity, this person who's speaking, is adorned with priestly garments. This should give us a little bit of an indication who this is. Is Jesus our high priest?
Yes.
All right. That's exactly what this picture is painting, but it's painting more than that. In the midst of the 7 candlesticks, verse 14, his head and his hairs were white like wool, white as snow. This is so pregnant with symbolism. When you see a man who has a head full of white hair, don't you see somebody who's been around the block a couple times? Got a little experience behind him? Been there, done that, knows a few things. Yeah, I think that's the idea here. But it's even more than that. He goes on to say, his eyes were as a flame of fire. His feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. His voice as of the sound of many waters. Turn to Daniel chapter 10. Daniel chapter 10 and verse 5. Daniel chapter 10 and verse number 5. Daniel's having another vision here. Verse 4 says, in the 420th day on the first month, I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel. Reminds me a little bit of what John said. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Same type of grammar being used, right? Look at verse 5. Daniel says, Then I lifted up mine eyes, and I looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like beryl. His face as the appearance of lightning. His eyes as lamps of fire. His arms and his feet like in color to polished brass. And the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. Doesn't that sound exactly like what we're dealing with in Revelation chapter 1, verse 14, 13, 14, 15? This image who has these eyes that are like fire, that this grand image of is girt about with this special linen, this certain beautiful priestly attire and garb. This is an image of something that's supposed to propel our minds into looking at something that's so awesome in its sight. But, now watch this. Look to verse 14 in Daniel chapter 10. Look at what Daniel's talking about, this vision where he sees this image. And in verse 14 he says this, Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the last days. For yet the vision is for many days. This image is telling Daniel, I'm going to let you know what's going to happen in the last days. Isn't that what the book of Revelation is all about? Before we get too far, I'm going to make a couple of comparisons real quick right here. Let's read verse 14 again of Daniel 10. Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the last days, for yet the vision is for many days. Let's go to Daniel 12 real quick, because this vision is yet for many days, okay? Let's look at verse 4, Daniel 12:4. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood two other, one on this side of the bank, one on the other side of the bank, saying, How long shall these wonders be? Look at verse 9. And he said, Go that way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. The vision that Daniel saw concerning the last days was sealed up. In other words, this vision was going to stop until the last days would come, because it wasn't for many days in Daniel's future. Daniel wrote this about 400 years before the coming of Christ. Now get it. Get it good. God said, I'm not going to reveal the last days totally, Daniel. We're going to seal up the vision for now. I'm going to give you more when the last days come. Because the last days are still too many days off in the future. It was about 400 years, right? So John comes around. He writes the book of Revelation. And in Revelation chapter 22, God said, don't seal up the vision, for the time is at hand. Now, John wrote that 2,000 years ago. Here's the argument. Here's what's taking place. People say the things that are in Revelation have not yet been fulfilled and are still in our future. They were written 2,000 years ago, and God wanted us to know about it and warn us about it. But the exact same vision God told Daniel 400 years in the future is too far off. I'm not going to yet reveal all these things to you. It's too far off. It's 400 years in the future. John's writing about things, and you know what people today say? They say about things in our future, but that's 2,000 years from when John wrote it. God mixed up. God gives something to Daniel he says it's too far off, it's 400 years away. But then he gives something to John, and he says, go ahead and write it. It's over 2,000 years away. Give it to him now. Does that make any sense?
Not at all.
Not at all. When John's writing about the things Daniel was writing about, John said the time is at hand. These things must shortly come to pass. The vision's now opened up. We can see it all. We know it all. Jesus is coming quickly. Even so come, Lord Jesus. Amen. Revelation 22:20, right? But in Daniel's time, it was too far off in the future. 400 years. The people that are in the futurist camp saying the things of Revelation are still to be in our future are saying God's mixed up and doesn't know how many years is too far in the future to be revealed, or too far in the past, doesn't know what he's doing. He's making a respecter of persons. He's keeping it from Daniel but giving it to John, even though it's only 400 years from Daniel and 2,000 years and counting from John. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see the argument?
Yeah, but why would Jesus die?
I didn't hear you, Ro.
Why would Jesus have to die if they think in that way?
If they're thinking that way, right? I got you. Yeah, Greg, you had your hand up. What are you thinking?
First of all, what you're just talking about.
Okay.
Saying is, what's the difference if God gave us that 2,000 years in our future or 2,400 years in our future? What really difference does that make? The difference is Daniel was told to not to look anymore into the vision. It was too far away, and John was told to go ahead and tell us that vision now. So there's a difference there.
Huge.
Knowledge, huge. But what I was talking about was in Daniel 10:15 also. It says, I set my face toward the ground and I became dumb. I was going to say, is that the same as just 12:4? Seal up that vision. He didn't have it. He was telling us a vision, but then when he looked toward the ground, he didn't have no more information about the future.
Right. He's looking to God to give him his information. He didn't have it. Mario, what you thinking? You raise your hand?
Yeah, I just want to add on what you guys are talking about. You know, in Daniel 12:8-9, you know, Daniel said, when will the end of these things be?
Right.
And he was referring to what he talked about earlier, the Great Tribulation and the resurrection.
Right. The resurrection of the just and unjust, the opening of the books, all those things.
And he said,
very good.
So he asked a specific question, when will these things be? And the response that he received was, I'm just paraphrasing, but don't worry about that right now. You know, you don't need to know the answer to that right now. I'll tell you the answer.
Right.
Later on, you'll find the answer out later on in the future.
It was like, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And then, so you got to remember, you asked that question, the question that he asked, and he got the answer that he'll find out later in the future. Well, later in the future in Revelation, right here, when we're reading 22:10, Daniel's question is answered.
That's right.
You know, he asked the question and then he receives the answer in 22:10.
Now, God said, Daniel, I'm not going to give you all the information for the last days events. It's too far in the future. Daniel knew there was going to be a resurrection of the just and unjust, Daniel 12:2. He knew the judgment was coming. The books would be open, Daniel 12:1. He knew that the gospel would go into all the world, Daniel 12:3. He knew that knowledge would be increased, the knowledge of God, the gospel of salvation. The angel stands and says, in those times, this is going to be when the times half the time is. That's what he says in Daniel 12:7. When the power of the holy people will be totally shattered. Now the holy people at that time were the Jews. Their power was in their covenant with God. When their covenant is completely shattered, when the covenant's gone, those things would be. But then he says, I'm going to seal up the rest of the message, for the time is too far off in the future. But now John comes around. He sees the same image, this image in the priestly attire with the eyes of flame. The judge is coming. And John's told in Revelation chapter 22, verse 10, and he saith unto me, seal not the sayings of the prophecy in this book, for the time is at hand. The time of what? The judgment? The resurrection of the just and the unjust? The time that the old covenant was going to be the power of the old covenant people will be completely shattered. John's saying it's here, it's now. The mystery that the old covenant had given and left, John's revealing the mystery so it's no longer a mystery. We can understand it. We can see it. We get it. That's what Paul is saying in Ephesians chapter 3. I have been given the mystery. I no longer is it a mystery. I gave it to you, and I'm writing it down so that when you read it, you can understand it also. Ephesians 3 through 5. Let's take a quick look at that, and then we'll get back into Revelation 1. Take a quick peek at this in Ephesians chapter 3, beginning verse 1. Look at what this says. For this cause I, Paul, the prisoner of Jesus Christ, for you Gentiles, if you have heard the dispensation of the grace of God which is given me to you word, how that by revelation he made known unto me the mystery, as I wrote afore in a few words, whereby when you read you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Christ. The Old Testament brought about a big mystery. They knew there was going to be a resurrection. They knew there was a judgment. They knew the Lord was coming in wrath. They knew the Lord was coming in power as the Savior. They knew all these things. They had an understanding about it. They knew they were dead. They knew that they were in Sheol, or the grave. They knew that they had to rise. Thy dead body shall rise together in my body, said the Lord. Isaiah chapter 26, verse 19. Your dead bodies are going to rise together in my body? Yeah. What's the body of the Lord? The church. They knew these things had to happen, but they didn't know the manner or the time of it. But now it's being revealed to them where they did know it. Paul says, I know it, I got it, I'm sharing it with you, you can know it, you have it. Peter said the old covenant prophets didn't know it and didn't understand it. They diligently sought after it. It's been given to us, now we're giving it to you. 1 Peter chapter 1. John's saying the same thing here in the book of Revelation. This mystery that was before, we're revealing it to you now. Why? Because the time is at hand. Time is not far off. In Daniel's time, the time is too far off, but it was only 400 years in his future. We're 2,000 years away from the writings of John, so we're way, way super far off. So the time that was at hand was back then, not any time in our future. That's impossible. Let's go to back to Revelation 1 and continue to look. Let's get into verses 14 and 15 here.
We in chapter 2.
Let me drop down here. Okay. His feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace. His voice is the sound of many waters. You know, we could get into all these things. They all have meaning. They all have merit. But I think we get what we're looking at here. This is the image of judgment. This is the image of resurrection. This is the image of the great judge who's coming, who's giving John the message. This is an image of Christ as our king, as our priest, as our judge, as the resurrection. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. These things represent all these things and more, okay? Verse 16. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. Anybody know what these 7 stars are? Verse 20. The mystery of the 7 stars which thou sawest in thy right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. What are the candlesticks? The churches, right? The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. We're going to start getting into angels here. Angels of the 7 churches. The 7 candlesticks are the 7 churches, right? But there's a couple of things I want to make a distinction with right here, right now, as we get into this. The secret of the 7 stars, this is Young's literal translation that's on the board right now. The 7 stars are the messengers of the 7 assemblies, and the 7 lampstands that thou hast seen are 7 assemblies. You notice how Young's Literal interprets this word messengers. You see that? Messengers. The 7 stars are messengers of the 7 assemblies. Assemblies is churches. Greek word ecclesia. King James, what does King James say?
Star.
Angels. The 7 stars are the angels. Why? Why the discrepancy? Why does King James say angels when Young's Literal says messengers?
It's the same thing.
Because it sounded good.
Because it sounded good. There's some places in the Bible where it sounds like a messenger is doing something that is so spiritual, so impossible, that it must be something more than just a plain messenger. So the translators made the word angel and put it in here. Literally in the Greek, if you were in the Greek 2,000 years ago, you would have never said angel when you read this word. You would have read messenger. That's what we should be reading right now. I brought up King James Version with the Strong Concordance. And if you look on the board, I've got it up on the board. Stars, let's see, 7 stars are the angels. It's right here. See this word angels? It says G32. I've got it on the board. Y'all see that? This G32 is a Strong's reference number. Now what this does, that tells us what the word is in the original Greek. Okay? It's G32. In the original Greek, when I click on it, it brings it up right here for us so we can see it. Angelos, angels. Now we think angels, we think a created being with spiritual power that has wings that floats around in the air. If you were Greek and you read this word angelos, angels, you would simply think messenger. Because that's the definition of it. Look at what Strong says. A messenger. Do you see that? A messenger. Especially an angel. But that's exactly what the word is. By implication, a pastor. Do you see this? A messenger. That Greek word, angelos, angels, literally means messenger. That's all it means. In particular, a pastor or a preacher, someone with a message. In that way, I am an angel of the Church of Christ at Ludington.
Amen.
Not that I got wings and I'm floating around like the Tooth Fairy. Not that at all. I'm a messenger of the Church of Christ in Ludington. That's what these stars were for the 7 churches which were in Asia. Notice carefully, please. These are messengers of the 7 churches. These are not messengers that came from heaven, angelic beings that come down going to those 7 churches. These are messengers of the 7 churches. These are the pastors. These are the preachers. These are the ones with the message. What's the message they should have been teaching and bringing forth? The gospel of Christ. The great lamp on the lampstand, right? All right.
Okay.
Mario, what you thinking, buddy?
Oh, my head's scratched.
Okay, I thought you raised your hand. Sorry about that. Raised your hand. All right, so let's read this again real quick because I want to understand what these stars are, okay? I'm going to bring up Young's Literal again. The secret of the 7 stars that thou hast seen upon my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands. The 7 stars are the messengers of the 7 churches, assemblies, and the 7 lampstands that thou hast seen are the 7 assemblies or churches. So these stars are messengers of the churches. That's what they are. That's what those stars are. Now, let's go to Matthew 24. Let's go to Matthew 24. Now's a good time. I'm going to take an extra 5 minutes here because we're going to get into some really good stuff. Let's drop down to verse 30. Matthew 24, verses 29 and 30. In Matthew 24, Look at verse number 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Y'all see that on the board? Jesus said, the sun's going to be darkened, no light. What did Jeremiah say the Jews were like during his day? They were in darkness because they did not have the knowledge of God. Remember? Oh, the sun's going to not give, the moon, what's going to happen to the moon? Shall not give her light. They're going to be so dark, they're not going to have the sun or the moon, but we're going to get into this a little bit more. And the stars shall fall from heaven. What are the stars in the book of Revelation?
Messengers.
The messengers of the churches. Who do you suppose the messengers of the old covenant were? Pharisees, scribes, the priests, thank you, prophets of the old covenant, right? Weren't they the messengers of God's old covenant? They're going to fall. How are they going to fall? The old covenant dies. The new covenant, Christianity, comes, and the 7 churches of Asia now has new stars. Amen. They preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. The old stars, the old messengers, they stop giving their light. They become null and void.
They stop preaching the truth.
If you ask me, that's powerful stuff, man. Do you all remember the story of Joseph and he had a dream? In the book of Genesis, I dreamed a dream. He's in the field. He's working with his 11 brothers, right? What's your dream, Joe? I dreamt the sun, the moon, and the stars bowed down and paid obeisance to me. They worship me. His brothers got all mad. What do you mean? Stars and the moon and the sun worshipped you. They took him to his daddy, Jacob. Jacob, you need to straighten Joseph out. Joseph, tell him what you dreamed. I dreamt the sun, the moon, the stars bowed down and worshiped me. Jacob got mad. I dare you say your father and your mother and your brethren are going to worship you. You're the youngest. I'm not going to bow down to you. But didn't that happen? Yes. They interpreted the sun, the moon, the stars as the father, the mother, and the brethren. The sun, the moon, and stars are very symbolic in the Bible. Doesn't mean the literal fireball in the sky. Doesn't mean the little lunar ball that we see at night. And it doesn't mean the little stars. It doesn't mean the North Pole star, the North Star. It doesn't mean the Big Dipper. The stars are what? The messengers. The old covenant messengers of Matthew 24 are going to fall. The new messengers, they'll be eternal if they'll stay faithful. Amen. That's the message of Revelation. That's the exact message of the whole book of Revelation. The sun, the moon, and stars of the old covenant fall. They're going to be destroyed. The new sun, moon, and stars, Father, Son, and messengers will bear that light eternally. No going out. No more shaking of the heavens and earth. No more utter destruction. Anybody have any thoughts? All right, we'll close down our Bible study there. We'll come back and get into the rest of it, Lord willing, next week. Get in there.
Good study.